Welcome to the Speak Your Way to Cash podcast, a podcast where we teach speakers how to land paid speaking engagements and corporate contracts. Each week, we deliver high-quality content that teaches you how to level up your speaking business. Be sure to join the Speak Your Way to Cash Facebook group after having your mind blown by this information-filled episode. Now, here's your host, Ashley Kirkwood, lawyer and professional speaker. This is the Speak Your Way to Cash podcast.
Hello. Welcome back to the Speak Your Way to Cash podcast. I have with me today Mike Robbins, author of 5 books. He's also spoken for some of the biggest corporations in the world. You've probably heard of some of his clients like Google, Wells Fargo, Microsoft, Gap, eBay, Charles Schwab, the NBA, the Atlanta Braves, and he's also a former professional athlete. So I'm really excited to have Mike here with us. Mike, welcome to Speak Your Way to Cash.
Hey, thanks, Ashley. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in the speaking business and what role does speaking still play to your business now?
Well, yeah, I've been in the speaking business now for 20 years, January of 2021, where we are right now. I started back then. And basically, my story is, so I grew up, Ashley, in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, where I still live here. And I was a baseball player all growing up and loved it, was pretty good at it. Actually got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees. Didn't end up signing a contract with the Yankees at that time because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college at Stanford. Went to Stanford, then got drafted by the Kansas City Royals out of Stanford and signed a pro contract back in 1995. And, my dream since I was a little kid when I started playing baseball at 7 was to pitch in the major leagues. Unfortunately for me, my 3rd season still in the minors, I went out to pitch one night, threw one pitch toward ligaments in my elbow, blew my arm out. I was 23 at the time. Started baseball, as I said, at 7, ended up having 3 surgeries actually over the next 2 years. Did everything I possibly could to try to come back because I love playing baseball. Unfortunately, wasn't able to come back. So I was forced to retire at the age of 25 and was like, well, what do I do now? Because even though I'd gone to Stanford and I'd gotten an education, I didn't really have a plan B. But it was the late 90s. I got a job working in the internet world doing online ad sales for a company that was based in New York, but had a San Francisco sales office, but was pretty lost and found myself outside of work, seeing a therapist and also reading a lot of books and taking workshops and trying to sort of figure out, well, who am I if I'm not an athlete, if I'm not a baseball player, and what the heck do I want to do with the rest of my life? Because, I sort of figured up until my mid 30s, maybe into 40, I could keep playing baseball and then I'd have to figure it out after that. And if I'd made it to the big leagues and made a bunch of money, then, I'd have some options. But, I was a kid raised by a single mom in Oakland, didn't have a lot of money growing up, didn't make much money playing baseball because I was in the minor leagues. And so I was sort of swirling around, but I had this secret fantasy that had started even when I was playing baseball. I would wander into bookstores and pick up books by Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and Marianne Williamson and people like that. And I think to myself, like, how do they do that? How do you get to do that? Like, is there some class you can take? Is there I don't know how that works, right? So that was really the only sense that I had of kind of the speaking world. Although I wouldn't have called it that back then. It was more like, I want to write a book and I want to sit on the couch with Oprah. And you know what I mean? Like, how does one go about doing that? But doing that at the age of 25, 26 years old seemed to me like you might as well said, be a brain surgeon or, climb Mount Everest or do something that was just like, I don't know how to do that. But then the universe sort of intervened. I got laid off from my .com job in the middle of 2000 when the .com bubble burst. And I had a mentor of mine ask me a question. Ashley, he said, if you could do anything and you don't have to worry about paying the bills, and what would you do? And I was like, well, I would speak and I would write and I would try to, inspire people. And he was like, great, you should do that now. And I was like, now? He's like, why not? And I'm like, well, because I'm 26 years old and I don't know anybody and I don't know how to do that. And I don't know how to make any money doing that. And I live in San Francisco. I got to pay the rent. Like, what are you, nuts? But I wasn't able to really find a job at the time because the job market was terrible. And I had just met my now wife. Michelle and I have been together for over 20 years. And she had started her own staffing company and she had a master's in psychology. And she and I were both starting to get into what was a new field emerging at the time of life coaching and business coaching. And she was like, you could totally start your own business. And so that's what I did at the beginning of 2001. I decided I'm a motivational speaker. I'm going to start this speaking business. I don't know what the heck that means or how to do that, but I'm going to figure it out. And 20 plus years later, I've had a chance to write some books and work with some great clients. And I think we were talking about the other day, my team and I have probably given about 2,500 presentations over the last couple decades. And now over the last 10, 11 months, they've all been on Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams.
Exactly. So that's interesting because I have a Speaker Way to Cash lounge on this new app called Clubhouse. And one of the things that a speaker came up and asked today was, well, how do I even get started? I left my job. I have a book. I want to do something in the speaking world, but I have no clue where to start. And I think there are so many people listening right now, whether it be live or listening to the podcast, who just don't know where to start. So I gave her my thoughts on that earlier, and we can chat about that. But what did you do at that point to start getting your first paid client? And what would you recommend a speaker do today that may be differently to get their first paid speaking client?
Well, look, the world is different in 2021 than it was in 2001. However, someone said
2019.
Right. That's true. Someone said to me, though, Ashley, and this is kind of an old speaking sort of axiom, is if you want to be a professional speaker, go give 100 free talks. And then by the end of that process, you'll be a professional speaker. Now, that may seem like a lot. That may seem daunting, but I heard that. And for me, what happened was, and this will be a roundabout way of answering your question, I sat next to a woman on an airplane in the summer of 2000, like right around the time when I got laid off. And she was on a flight with her husband flying. I was flying from the Bay Area to Los Angeles. They were then going to fly down to Sydney, Australia, because she had a speaking engagement at a conference and she had just written a book. And I was like, oh, that sounds like the coolest thing ever. Like they're paying you to take a trip to Australia and you get to give a speech. And basically, she was one of the first people that said that thing to me. You know, you want to be a professional speaker, give 100 free talks. And I kept kind of hearing that. And I'd also heard about an organization called the National Speakers Association that I wasn't familiar with at the time. And this was a whole group of people that get together and talk about the business of speaking, right? And so I went to my first NSA, National Speakers Association meeting in March of 2001, after a couple months after I'd started my business. But me starting my business was really just like making some business cards that said Mike Robbins, motivational speaker. But I had gone out and started to give a few talks, like at the Rotary Club and at my high school in Oakland, Skyline High School, and a few places. And my goal was I was going to give 100 free talks. I had my little notebook and I'd write down in my notebook like what I talked about and how it went and what worked and what didn't work. And I figured by the end of 100, maybe someone would pay me. And it was actually, I think, talk number 10 or 11 that I actually got paid. And it was through meeting a woman who worked at a company called Sutter Health, which is hospitals and medical centers all up and down the West Coast here. And ultimately, what I would say to people, and things are different today than they were 20 years ago, but a lot of it is just being willing to put ourselves out there and say, this is what I'm doing. And know that early on, it's going to be weird. And especially in this weird virtual Zoom world we find ourselves in now, it's even weirder. But like the more we put ourselves out there, the more we let people know that we're doing this and we're doing this for real and we're serious about it. And, you know, the name of your show and the conversation we're having is like Speak Your Way to Cash, meaning if you want to do this professionally, you have to think about it as a profession and not like a hobby or someone's going to, you know, even if you're doing it on the side initially. And that was my goal from the beginning. As much as I was hoping to write and do other things, it was all for me always about speaking. That was what I was interested in. That's what I'm still interested in. That's what I do. That's what I love. You know, pre-COVID, I would give somewhere between 80 and 100 presentations a year around the country, around the world. During COVID, I think we've done 125 virtual events and meetings and things here just in my office in California, which has been weird. But, you know, it's what we've all had to do and what we're going to continue to have to do until we're on the other side of the pandemic.
But that's also very hopeful that you've still been able to amass that many engagements during a pandemic and virtually. And a lot of thoughts about what you said. For those people listening who are like, do I really have to give 100 free talks? No, you don't. You don't have to do that. And
no.
You could. That is, I told people, I literally said this morning. I've interviewed so many speakers who've been in the business. Everyone who's been in the business probably 20 plus years has had some variation of doing some speaking for free. I don't think I've interviewed any professional speaker who has lasted, who has not done some engagement at some time for free until they figured out what exactly it is what they want to do. But there are some people that already have an expertise, that already know exactly what they want to speak about, and that have already amassed a body of work to support their expertise. I don't recommend that you, with your PhD and all your experience, go and try to speak at Chamber of Commerce lunches for free. I recommend that you get a strategy and you do engagements, and maybe you do those engagements. Like, And instead of free, if you have a book, what I did starting out in the speaking business is I just bulk sold the book. And I would say I would waive the speaking fee. It cost me $2 to print the book. I would sell 100 to 300 books for $20 a pop. They were selling on Amazon for $27. So I would get my speaking fee, wouldn't lose too much on the book sale. And that was an easier sale starting out. And so there's so many ways to do it. However, you do need to be good because if you get the first engagement and you are not able to clearly articulate your value and move that audience to giving you an amazing testimonial and take them from point A to point Z, it probably would have been better for you to have done some warm-up engagements without a large check behind it. Totally. An organization's money and not being prepared to deliver. So if you can get some coaching early on, you may be able to go in at the top. We had a client whose first major contract was for like $27,000. And so that works. But again, she already had the expertise. She knew what she was doing. She had guidance. She was able to go in at a different level. But in the beginning, if you're not going to have that guidance and you're really just winging it, more power to you. But you don't really want to have a first-time client. You want to be able to serve those clients for the long term. And if you embarrass a client on stage, they're not going to have you back, in my experience. I have not heard stories about speakers bombing terribly their first go and the meeting planner and or client being like, yeah, okay, that's all right. Just come back next year.
Right. And it's a bit of a balance. I mean, I think what we all have to remember with anything that we're doing, especially newly, like we're going to kind of suck at it at first. And that's okay. I mean, that's part of the learning process. I was saying to someone actually right before you and I got on, I was talking on a Zoom call with a client and we were talking about their virtual event. And I said, I've been doing this 20 years, Ashley. And it's like, I was a pitcher in baseball. I was a left-handed pitcher, right? I spent 18 of the first 25 years of my life playing baseball. And my experience of doing virtual events over the last 10, 11 months, and I would say this to my wife or people who are friends of mine in the business, I say, it feels like it's still baseball. I'm still pitching. Just instead of pitching with my left hand, I have to pitch with my right hand. So like when I first started doing virtual events, because I was laughing with this client, I did a virtual event for them early last year when we just got into the pandemic. And I was saying to them today on the call, like, hey, remember that event we did last, March or whenever that was? Gosh, thanks for inviting me. And I kind of sucked at that because I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, just the logistics even of the Zoom and the share screen and some of the stuff, I was like, I remember feeling really nervous and anxious. And what I said to my team last year when we got into COVID is it felt a lot to me like when I first started in the business, both on the delivery side and on the sales side. I didn't know what to charge or how to charge or who to talk to or if anyone had any money. And in the first month or two, we didn't know what the heck was happening. But to me, it was actually a really challenging but beautiful reminder in a humbling way of like, oh yeah, I remember this feeling. This is exactly how I felt for not only the first few months, but the first few years I was in the business, that there were a lot of things I was doing that were new and that were different, both when I would be on the platform speaking, different size groups, different rooms, different, material I was working on or different ideas or different ways to try to engage. And also on the sales side and on the business side. Because, I grew up as a baseball player. I did pretty well in school. I got a good education at Stanford, but I was not an entrepreneur. I was not a business person. I was not raised by entrepreneurs. My mom was a PE teacher. My dad was in radio and television. And so again, I say all that to anyone listening, like you don't have to have an MBA to do this. You don't have to, Ashley, you have a background obviously in the law and in different aspects of business. Like we all have to bring what we have to the party, so to speak. And then there are things that you can learn along the way. And for me, like joining the National Speakers Association, especially in the early years, was super helpful to me and everybody listening to this, finding people like Ashley and others who are out in the world who understand some of the business side of this thing, that if you have a real passion and a message that you want to share, you don't have to necessarily be an expert in lots of other things. You can learn, you can hire people, you can work with people, you can figure stuff out along the way. Because even 20 years into this business, like there are certain parts of this business that I absolutely love and are right in my zone of genius. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's like, I don't really like, I'm not very good at, I don't really understand. So I either figure it out and bumble my way through it, which I've done, especially in the early days when I didn't have any money, or I hire other people and, build a team around me to like, hey, could you take care of that? Could you figure that out? Because that's going to drive me crazy and I'm not going to be very good at it. So we all have to figure out, to your point, of where we are in life. If you're coming to the speaking world as someone who spent 20 years in industry, or you have an advanced degree, or you've written a book, that's different. I came to this business as a 26-year-old former minor league baseball player who got injured, who had my whole story. I had to use what I had 20 years ago with the tools that were available. There was no social media. There were no podcasts. There were barely even websites. let alone nobody had blogs or email lists or any of the things that we now have access to. So again, I don't say that to sound like some old guy going, well, in my day, because 20 years earlier and 20 years before that, there were people out in the world speaking. They were just doing it in different ways.
Right.
The good news about today is there's so many different avenues and platforms. The bad news is there's a ton of noise and everybody on the planet wants to give a TED talk and thinks they're a speaker. And that's great. But it's like, how do you then rise above the noise? And actually, to what you're talking about and we're talking about here, how do you actually get paid to do
Right.
this and not just do it for some followers or for some fun?
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the Speak Your Way to Cash podcast. Real quick, I would love if you applied to work with us at Speak Your Way to Cash. In fact, I have created a short application that would let me know if you are the right fit. If you are a speaker looking to land 5- and 6-figure speaking contracts, you should 100% apply to be in the Speak Your Way to Cash Academy. And here's the beautiful thing. If you get accepted into the Academy, you are automatically able to listen to a 2-hour training where I break down the paid method that myself and my clients use to land 5- and 6-figure corporate speaking contracts. All you need to do to apply is go to ashleynicolekirkwood.com/apply. Go to ashleynicolekirkwood.com/apply. Again, go to ashleynicolekirkwood.com/apply. Now, if you want to make it even easier and you're already on your phone, pull out your phone and text me. That's right. You can now text me directly to apply and to learn more about working with Speak Your Way to Cash. So you can text me at 312-847-4590. Again, 312-847-4590. Just text me apply to 312-847-4590. All right, guys, let's get back to this great episode. And what do you really want? Because I often find when people, I've done 2 TEDx talks, you've done 3 TEDx talks, and I get asked a lot, how do I get a TEDx talk? That's what I want to do. And my question is always, what's the purpose of your TEDx talk? Because although TED wants ideas worth spreading, I'm a businesswoman. Like I want to profit from my ideas, not just spread them. So for me, I use TEDx as a way to launch. I've used TEDx as a way to launch signature speeches or ideas that I want to put into my clients in their companies or in their colleges. But I do find that, to your point about how do you profit? You have to have a plan, not just, and I tell people this all the time, do not confuse pretty stages with stages that pay, because sometimes they're not the same. Like we've seen people who worked with amazing big companies, and although the company does have the budget, they may not have given it to them. It may have been a publicity, it was an exposure opportunity. So just don't get confused about that. And so I wanted to ask you, because you have books and obviously you have different streams of income in your speaking business. What are the streams of income in your speaking business, and how do your books play a role in like your strategy for growing your company?
Well, I mean, the primary revenue stream in my business is and has continued to be over the years speaking fees. Me speaking, delivering keynotes, delivering workshop seminars for these big Fortune 500 companies that we're super grateful to get to partner with. We have developed some digital content over the years, not a ton, a little bit more during the pandemic, just sort of by necessity. Obviously, everything we're doing these days is virtual. And then the books themselves, I mean, we generate a little bit of revenue on the books. For the most part, though, and we could go down a whole sort of rabbit hole of talking about book publishing and how to publish and where to publish and self-publish versus traditional publishing. My 5 books have been published by 2 different publishers. Wiley did my first 2. Hay House has done my last 3. And in the book publishing world, as you know, Ashley, because you're an author, it can be challenging to actually generate much revenue from the book itself, particularly if you go the traditional publishing route, because the amount of money that you ultimately make on the book per unit, especially once you have to earn back your advance, isn't a ton. So we've used the books, and my books, all 5 of my books have done well in different ways. None of them have been runaway bestsellers. If you write a big best-selling book, that can put you on the map and open up a whole bunch of doors. But that's kind of like having a viral TED Talk. That's kind of like, not quite like winning the lottery, but I say to people all the time, like, write a good book, write a book that you're proud of, write a book that represents you and your current thinking and what you think is going to be valuable to people. But if you're writing the book thinking it's going to be on the New York Times bestseller list and that you're going to do an hour-long interview with Oprah or Tim Ferriss's podcast or whatever platform you might think is like right in your niche that's huge, like that might happen and it's possible. But so I've always looked at the books as a leverage point. Initially, my first book was like, could I write a book? How does that work? Could I get it published? If I did, what would happen? And that was a huge milestone in and of itself and a challenging process. And the subsequent books have been more about what do I have to say? What's some of my new and I think most important thinking? And how can this benefit the people that I work with and speak to? And what I've seen over the years is cumulatively, the books have just continued to add credibility to me and to the platform and to our team and our business. And they provide value for people. But like to your point, sometimes we don't do a lot these days where we sort of waive my fee and just do a big bulk book buy. Unless I'm launching a book, we might do that on a case by case basis. We have found though that a lot of our clients will just pay me my full fee and then buy books for everybody on top of it. Yeah. So that's always if you can get that, that's ideal. Sometimes we can negotiate a little bit, but we don't do a lot of selling of the books directly ourselves anymore. We sell them individually through Amazon. And then we use a company called Porchlight Books that used to be called 800 CEO Read, where they're sort of set up to do discounted bulk buys for corporate events. And nowadays, they've actually been super flexible where they'll send them, if the client sends a spreadsheet with everybody's name and address, they'll send them to everybody's house instead of to Chicago, to the Marriott where the event was going to be, because we're not getting together for events like that. So
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that because there aren't a lot of, now I think a lot of speakers are so diversified. One of the people we had on came on and talked about like the different 7 streams of revenue that they have in their business. But I appreciate a traditional speaking business as well, and hearing how you're still able to make the business work utilizing the traditional avenues. So that leads me to another question about your sales process, because if you are more of the traditional speaker with that setup, then you essentially need to have your current customers and always be doing business generation activities as well. What does that look like for you now? Do you have a team that's consistently reaching out? Are you all targeting a particular industry, or do you paint it with like a wide brush, since your topics really can relate to almost any industry?
You know, the good news for me is I've been doing this long enough. I've built some really incredible relationships. You know, I live in the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area. So a lot of our clients, Google's been a big client for years. eBay's been a big client, Adobe, technology companies that are here. And I say that because what I find, like I have a call later today with a friend who's also a client who's now at, Sony PlayStation. Mm-hmm. She was at eBay and StubHub for years. She left and, just reached out to me. We get so much of our business from relationships that I have and have built over the years, as well as spin-offs from events that we do. So I find the best marketing for me, Ashley, is speaking. And it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. It took a while to build that up. Yep. And quite frankly, to your point earlier, like you got to be good. You got to both deliver value. But if you deliver value, not only is the client happy, the meeting planner, the event planner, the executive that brought you in to speak to his or her group, they're happy. Thank you so much. But if you're at a high enough level with who you're talking to and you deliver value, inevitably what's going to happen is some spin-offs are going to come from that. Mm-hmm. Another thing that happens for us that we're super grateful for is a lot of our clients, like, I've probably done 150 speaking engagements for Google over the last decade. Mm-hmm. So what that means is we're always looking for not so much an industry, but the bigger the company, the better, because they got more people, they got more leaders, they got more events, they got more meetings, they got more needs. So again, a company like Google that has 100,000+ employees, or Wells Fargo that has 275,000 employees. It's not that I do engagements with small companies, that have 50 employees or 100 mm-hmm. employees, and I'll speak at their all hands meeting. I'm doing one of those later this week. So we don't discriminate, but the bigger the organization, the more we know, there's some spin-off opportunities. Plus, we know they have a ton of money and they have budgets for this because this is what they do. So that's a long way of saying, like, the sales process for me is a lot of just staying in touch with clients that I know. And yeah, there's a few people on my team that will follow up on inquiries and do stuff. But for the most part, I actually enjoy the relationship selling aspect of the business, just because a lot of these folks have literally become friends of mine. And, just given my age, I'm about to turn 47 next month. When I started in the business, I was just about to turn 27. And there are people that I know now that are CEOs of companies or senior executives of companies that were about the same age. And they were basically kids when they were starting, just like I was starting. And we've kind of grown up together. But now I get the call and they're like, hey man, I just got the job as the CEO of this company, or hey, I'm doing this here. Would you come and talk to us? And it's more just like a friend talking to a friend. So it's less of a hard sell and more of, hey, what do you need? What can work? let's do this.
That's the best. And so I wonder, just because I'm a double Big Ten person. So I went to Northwestern for law school, University of Illinois for undergrad.
Nice.
And I think one of the things that I'm going to change this year, I'm talking to my team about it, is like utilizing that network. Because I see it through the alumni papers tell me all the time, like, so-and-so just became general counsel of this, or we have an alum of one of the firms I used to work for that just got high up in the TED organization. And so it's like, all right, I need to be leveraging these relationships. Did you do anything to talk to like the alum of Stanford? Do you leverage those relationships? Do you have friendships and stay in touch with people by way of relationships? Because I think for a lot of us, a lot of people, it's just, you just get away from those things and you don't think like to keep those relationships tight outside of your immediate friend circle. But was there anything that you did like that early in your career that you found invaluable that you could share with the audience?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it sounds like you live in the general vicinity of where you went to school, like I do. Yeah. And that helped, right? So I live in the Bay Area. Stanford's in the Bay Area. Over the years, my relationships, I spent a lot of time in the early days. Just given my age, I did more speaking on college campuses in general, but I went back to Stanford, and that would be a place where I would offer to speak for free. Yeah. Just because it's like, hey, any connections I can make here, this is good credibility, trying to build up my client list, trying to get in front of the right people. I did some stuff for the athletic department there because, I'd been an athlete at Stanford, so I could speak to the student athletes who were 3, 4, 5 years younger than me. And I'm like, hey, here's what you can assume is going to happen over the next couple of years kind of thing. And I would say, it's also been just utilizing my relationships, the people that I met at Stanford. I mean, so many of my classmates and people I went to school with are doing extraordinary things out in the world, especially just given our age now and where we are and sort of approaching 50. I think, again, depending on where you are in your life, depending on where you went to school, I'm a big believer, again, utilize what you have. Yep. And the truth of the matter is, look, we also have to be mindful to some degree of who we are, where we are, what we look like, what our background is, what's going to resonate, what's not going to resonate, what kind of things can we talk about. I mean, one of the things actually for me, when I came out of school after baseball, what I wanted to start speaking about actually was diversity. And as a 26 going on 27-year-old straight white guy, 20 years ago, my initial thought and reaction that I got from people like, well, who the hell's going to listen to you? But it's like, I grew up in Oakland, went to inner city schools, got my degree at Stanford in American Studies with a specialization in race and ethnicity. Actually had this weird experience as a white person, particularly as a straight white man, growing up where I grew up, then going to college and realizing, oh, the world looks really different here. My friends from home would call just from Oakland, 45 minutes from Stanford, and say, what's it like at Stanford? And my response would be, it's cool, but I've never been around this many white people before, because that was my honest reaction. And I say all of that because what I decided, though, in the early days of my speaking business was I couldn't find a way to really talk about these issues in a way that I felt was respectful and helpful, because there were a lot of people, experts in what we now would call diversity, equity, and inclusion in those days. And I knew that work was really important. I had a sense at the time, and I don't want to sound self-important about this, but I had a sense at the time that I'm not sure if white people or men are really that open to listening to people that don't look like them. That was kind of my gut feeling, but I couldn't articulate it and I didn't know. So I moved away from that and thought, you know what? These things are still really important to me. I'm going to continue to try to educate myself and pay attention in my life, but I'm going to keep that out of my work because those issues can be sensitive and polarizing. And that's often the way that white people, myself included, think about these things. Fast forward to today and my own evolution, the changes that we've seen in the country and the world. My most recent book is called We're All in This Together, which I wrote in 2019 and very specifically knew would come out in 2020, not knowing the pandemic was going to happen, not knowing what would happen with George Floyd and with so many other things that happened in the country that then put so many issues in a front and center kind of way that were different, and so many white folks and white leaders and just asking questions and reading books like White Fragility and all this stuff. And I say all of this to say I am not a diversity, equity, inclusion expert. However, that has become a bigger part of my work in the last couple of years for two reasons. One, it's become more important, and people, for better or worse, some people are now paying attention more than they were. And secondly, I then started to have more courage and more awareness that I want to be talking about some of these things in addition to some of the other things that I've talked about for years, because I'm willing and able to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. I think that you brought up a couple of good points that I think are good to actually talk about. One being, we white men are not always willing to listen to people who don't look like them. And that is a bit of a problem, though, because what ends up happening is the very people who have been subject to the discrimination cannot then profit from the education that needs to take place.
I know, it's insane, right?
That I've seen is that DEI experts that are Black, right? They are grossly underpaid, and the highest contracts, the largest DEI contracts on the market typically go to white DEI professionals, men and women. And so that is just a huge issue for me. It's actually why we started the Academy, because so many people, especially of color, were talking about these topics and being paid $1,000, which is laughable for such a traumatic conversation. But I appreciate that you wrote a book, that you have that experience, and that you can talk about it. I would just encourage any person who has the relationships to have those conversations to bring in, whether it be subcontracting or otherwise, a Black professional to also help with that conversation. Because the contract wage inequities that I see in the speaking market still make it so that Black and brown speakers are grossly underpaid. And so I don't know how we can fix that problem or what that looks like. But even in having the conversations when money is involved, we just need to make sure that that money is equitably spread out, especially to people who have the lived and educational experiences. Because just being a racial minority doesn't really qualify you to speak on DEI issues either. So there are so many that have, I literally can think of 15 right now that have the degrees and everything else, and they're getting contracts for like $1,000, like literally, like I'm not even exaggerating.
No, I hear you.
$1,000 to $2,000 to talk about DEI issues, which is so troubling.
Well, I appreciate you saying all of that, because it's been an interesting journey for me just to sort of watch this unfold in different ways. Both kind of, again, someone who's been in the speaking business for 20 years, watching things and paying attention at a certain level, seeing some of the disparity between men and women, between white people and non-white people, and just sort of how that plays out at the same time. Then looking at, what's interesting. So I have a bunch of friends who are DEI experts. And I remember talking in March, right as COVID hit, to one of my friends who runs a consulting business, a DEI consulting business. And she's such an amazing practitioner, and she empowers so many people, not just with her work, but in the ways that she sort of brings people into her network. And she said to me, I remember she said, I've had to lay off a bunch of people. And what I'm really scared about is that companies are going to cut all of this focus that we've built up over the last decade, because the economy's been good, the focus on the importance of diversity and inclusion. Everyone's just panicked right now. The sky's falling, right? So 2 months later, after we have so many really important protests happening in the US and a bunch of conversations. And it was interesting talking to her, because she said, oh my gosh, now my phone is literally ringing off the hook and everybody wants what we have to offer. But to your point, part of what, and look, I say this as someone who doesn't know what it's like to be anybody other than me, like all of us, right? But there's a couple people right now that I'm mentoring who aren't white, a young African-American woman, a young African-American man, another biracial man who's a really interesting story. And they've just recently come to me. One of the things I try to do in my business and have for years, Ashley, is mentor people in even small ways when I can, because I've received so much mentoring over the course of my life. But I was having a conversation with this young woman who's wanting to get into the speaking business. And one of the things I said to her, I said, look, I'm not going to pretend that I know what it's like to be you. I'm not going to pretend like I know what it's like to be female or to be Black or to be any of the lived experience you've had. But what I do know right now, for what it's worth, I'm talking to a lot of business leaders who are really interested. They know they don't know a lot of stuff. They know they need help. They're scared, but they know their organizations need this help. And so I say that from the standpoint of, to your point though, the sad reality is we're still seeing this being undervalued, but some of it then comes to both on a societal level and a systemic level. How do we make some of those changes? But on an individual level for all of us. And I know this even as a straight white man getting into this business 20 years ago, I had a hard time asking for what I was worth. I had a hard time asking for my fees. And that's been a personal journey over the years. And it's like, what are any of us worth? I don't know. It's whatever we're willing to ask for and what they'll pay us. And there are times now I literally will make sometimes in one speech as much money as I made the entire first year I had my business. And it kind of blows my mind. And I don't say that to brag, but it's like, oh my gosh, am I really that much better 20 years later than I was 20 years ago? I don't think so. It's just somehow or another, I've been able and willing to build up what needs to be built up, or get in the right situation, or have the right privilege or the right access, or ask for a certain amount of money and have them say yes. And I've learned a lot over the years, Ashley, with friends of mine in this business, some of whom will ask for 2x and 5x what I ask, and some of whom will ask for way, way less. And the reality is it's not usually directly proportional to the skill or the talent, or even, quite frankly, the value. It's often the willingness to just say, this is what I charge. And then the awkward, vulnerable, uncomfortable moment to wait to see how they respond.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point. Like, what are any of us worth? You will never get your worth. Like, humans, we're all worthless, right? Like, we are, you can't put a price tag to it. And I always say, like, you can't pay me my worth, but you will pay this rate. Like, there is a rate that I'm not going to take, and I'm okay with that. And I think for a lot of speakers, because I've been asked this question, and maybe it's because I'm a lawyer and I'm used to asking for money because we're doing contract negotiations all the time. But people ask me, like, what happens if they say no? Well, then you don't do it. You make a concerted effort to figure out, well, I'm not going to get out of bed for a certain amount of money, for less than a certain amount of money. And you just say no. Yeah. And the first time you say no to $5,000, it may feel like, oh my God, this is crazy. But then the next time when you get a $15,000 contract to work for 45 minutes, then you're going to be like, I made the right choice. So I would just encourage everyone to get comfortable saying your rate, whatever the rate that you want, because if your first time saying it is to a client, it's just going to be way too awkward. And one of the exercises I have my students do in the Speak Your Way to Cash Academy is like, write a check to yourself. Like, what does that figure look like on a piece of paper? See it, and then you'll be more comfortable saying it in real life when you're talking to a client. But that is a good point. Everyone has that apprehension and deals with those self-confidence issues. And it does span across race and gender. What I've seen, though, is because of just the way our society is, there are certain groups that have an even harder mental challenge getting over, man, am I really worth this? Is anyone really going to pay me this? And you have to get over that. Like, you're not going to feel 100% comfortable. I still am like, darn, I just sent a proposal out for $900,000. I did that. Like, there may be some apprehension for that, but I'm still going to do it. So maybe you don't get over it, but you still need to send it. You still need to say it. Like, just do that, or else you'll always be underpaid if you don't ask for it. People are not gratuitously giving out checks here.
Absolutely. And part of it, I think, look, a big part of my work has always focused on authenticity and vulnerability. And I think for any of us to get out in the world and put ourselves out there to want to speak, whether you're on a stage or we're on Zoom, whether it's a TED Talk or it's a workshop somewhere for the public, whether it's a corporate, anything, that takes some courage, because people might say no, people might laugh at you, people might judge you. So like, I think it's important to acknowledge that. When we get into the business of speaking, I have found that to be both rewarding but incredibly challenging over the years on a personal level, on a mental, emotional level. I mean, what I love, Ashley, is, and I love speaking, but I'll have people come up to me, I'll be at a big event and there's 1,000 people or some, and that was great. And it's so amazing that you don't get nervous. And I look at them like, what are you, nuts? Of course I get nervous. Like, I love doing this, but like when I'm standing on a stage in front of people, even when I'm on Zoom, sometimes I get butterflies in my stomach, because that just means I'm alive. I learned that as an athlete. Like, I loved playing baseball, but it's not like I went out on the mound and I wasn't nervous or I didn't have those butterflies in my stomach. Of course I do. And when it comes to negotiations or even asking for, here's a couple things that I've learned about this over the years. Every time I've raised my fee, it's always been scary. Every time I ask for the fee or the full fee or whatever, there is some fear of, like, again, they could say no. The thing though about it is, here's what we have to remember, right? Like, the answer is always no if you don't ask. And there's been times in life, we've all had this happen, where you quote something and then they say, oh, no problem. And it's like, oh, I should have asked for more, right? And like, my big fear early on is I had to sort of get this in my head. It was like, even when my fee was, $5,000 or whatever it was, it's like, am I really who's worth $5,000 to give a talk that I would literally give for free? I love doing this so much. But remember, they're not paying you for the 45 minutes or an hour on stage or on Zoom or whatever the platform is. They're paying you for your entire life and everything that you've learned and all that you've gone through and all the successes and failures and everything, so that you can crystallize that information, that experience, into relevant and useful, valuable information that people can then take and do something with. That's what the value is. And like, there are people out in the world, if you're a former president of the United States, or I see Michelle Obama's book behind you in the background there, or you're someone like that, or Oprah Winfrey, like, imagine what the kind of fees those people are getting. Now you could say, well, they're celebrities but they're humans like you and me and like the rest of us. So it's really about the value value that's brought forth in that. And when we can remember that, and if I'm ever nervous about it, or there's an engagement I really want to do, but I think, oh, they're going to say no, or this is too much, or they don't have this kind of budget, I'm just pretty transparent about it. Here's what my fee is. And you know what? There's some wiggle room sometimes, and just see what they say. But either way, it's like I've almost never had an experience in my life in the speaking business for 20 years where they've said no, been upset about whatever I asked for. If they really want me to do it, or I really want to do it, you know what? You're allowed to negotiate. Like there's you got to do what's right for yourself. And there are times in life when I waive my fee because it's really a good cause, or it's really important, or I really want to do it, or it's a group of educators or healthcare workers, or it's a prison, or it's a nonprofit. And it's like, you know what? I am here to serve, not simply just, and I make sure it's in the context of the business. And I'm not running a nonprofit, and I'm not doing this for free. But there are times, and in the beginning of the pandemic, you know what I did? You know what we did? You know how we were able to get so much business right away? I literally reached out to all of our best clients and said, I am here to serve you in this crisis. What do you need? And yes, there was a little bit of a self-serving part of that because I wanted to stay busy. I wanted to learn how to speak more effectively virtually. And I was hoping that eventually, like in the beginning of my speaking business, when I did everything for free, there would be some money there. But I did it from a genuine place of I knew people were scared and they didn't know what to do. And I listened to my intuition and my heart and said, Mike, just show up and serve. If your business is going to go away completely, like there's no more speaking business because it just vanishes, like you're going to have to find something else to do anyway. So be of service right now and figure that out. And, you know, I have a family and a mortgage and people counting on me and college funds to fund for our daughters and other things going on, as well as a team and people I employ. But at the end of the day, I think if we're not here to be of service and we don't really want to make a difference, if we are just focused solely on the cash, this is the bit of the paradox, Ashley, right? Yes, we want to speak for cash, learn how to make this a real business, monetize this, get what we absolutely deserve to get. And at the same time, like there are a lot of other widgets you can go sell as opposed to selling yourself and your passion. So if you're just in it for the money, be careful because I've seen a lot of people crash and burn that way.
Yeah, you have to have a serve first mentality. Just make sure you're not serving at your detriment. For most people that I work with, greed is not their issue. Their issue is they're grossly underpaid and grossly overworked. But I do think that that's a really good point because a part of the experience of being a speaker is you transforming and changing lives. You just don't want to do it at your detriment. But when you're thinking about serving your clients, especially, you mentioned a really good point that I wanted people to pick up on. You reached out to your best clients, people you've already done business with, people you knew were vetted, people you knew could have a long-term relationship with your company. And so you made a strategic decision, which is very different than just throwing something at the wall and hoping it sticks. I think that a lot of people, when this pandemic hit, who have been surviving and thriving in it, did something very similar. We did for our law firm, we gave all of our current clients for Christmas a complimentary, no charge legal audit just on their business as it stands to make sure they're ready to go for the world that we're in now. It's a totally different world. And so, but again, we did that for current clients that we already knew, people we wanted to do business with, people we wanted to serve in a way that made sense for them and us. And so that's just such a good thing to take away from this. So Mike, it has been time well spent, an amazing wealth of information you shared with us. How can people stay in touch with you and work with you if there are some corporate, we have folks who listen and learn about speakers through this podcast and bring them into their companies as well. So how can corporate clients reach out to you and how can budding speakers learn more about what it is that you do? Yeah,
the best way is at our website, which is just mike-robbins.com. That's just MIKE-ROBBINS.com.
Awesome. Well, reach out to Mike. I am so excited that he took this time to spend with us. I know he's very busy doing hundreds of engagements, even still. And Zoom fatigue is real. So I do not take it for granted that he came on and talked to us today. Thank you so very much for your time. And thank you guys for listening to the Speak Your Way to Cash podcast. All right. Wasn't that interview amazing? If you're anything like me, you have pages full of notes. But here's the thing. Before you head out, I want you to go to facebook.com and join the Speak Your Way to Cash Facebook group. That is where I am. That's where a ton of other speakers are, a ton of other people who listen to the show. We all congregate there and chat. And it's 100% free. Now, if you're ready to take your speaking career to the next level, I have two ways for you to do that. One, you can go to ashleynicolekirkwood.com/SYWTC live replay and pick up the live replay. That training is 7 modules, chock full of information. It's crazy. Go over there, read all about it. Or if you want a more personal experience, you're already
You already know that you want to be a speaker. You're ready to fully commit and you want someone to walk you through it and save you tons of time Googling and doing it on your own. Then book a VIP day with me. You can go to AshleyNicoleKirkwood.com, scroll down until you see the VIP day section and get more information on that there. All right. Thank you guys again for watching. Please do not forget to leave us a review. That is how we keep this train rolling and get some of the best speakers in the world to get on this show. So please, please, please leave a review. Shoot me a message on Facebook or Instagram, and Facebook in the Speak Your Way to Cash group, Instagram at the Ashley Nicole Show. And I'd be more than happy to chat with you and say hi. All right, y'all have an awesome, awesome day.